Greetings, booktubers. Welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Welcome to a nonfiction edition of Grammaticus Books, where today we're going to talk about Hell in a Very Small Place, published by Bernard Fall in 1966, the definitive military historical account of the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. It's very late. I worked a whole shift today. It's late at night, and I'm trying to get this video up so I can get it up for tomorrow morning and stay on my schedule. I have a bad history. I have a bad track record of having difficulty stringing words together at this time of night, but I got to do it. We're driving on, so we're going to do this video for better or worse here. And we're going to review Hell in a Very Small Place by Bernard Fall, 1966, the definitive account of the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in Indochina, which happened in 1954. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to talk briefly about this book, which is also nonfiction, which is called Longitude by Dava Sobel, which is about chronology and the navigation problem, the longitude problem back in the 1700s. This is a great little shorty, a great quick read that I also finished up last week, and I'll talk about this a bit as well. But what got me out of this, I don't want to call it a rut because it's not a rut, but this pattern I had been in all summer of reading nothing but vintage science fiction and vintage fantasy. Well, it was a fiction novel, a military action adventure novel, a pure fiction called Casca the Legionnaire, about a historical battle, about Dien Bien Phu. So this is Barry Sadler's action hero Casca. At this book here, number 11, he's known as Karl Langer, and he's fighting with the French and the French Foreign Legion in Indochina, and he winds up at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. This is a great novel. I highly recommend it. It's very entertaining, but it's not exactly a historical account of the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. It has that as a background. You do get some of the history, a little bit of the history from like a 1,000-foot perspective, but it got me interested in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, that unmitigated modern military disaster that it was for the French. And so I wanted to dig a little deeper, and I came across this book here by Bernard Fall, which is just absolutely stupendous in level, its depth of research, and the amount of information in it, and its ability to pull you in and keep you interested through nearly 500 pages of this book here. So, Hell in a Very Small Place. Again, it's about the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. If you don't know what that battle is, if it's something that's new to you, I'll give you just a very quick recap of it. The French had a colonial possession of Indochina, aka modern-day Vietnam, and after World War II, they were engaged in a vicious war with Vietnamese insurgents known as the Viet Minh. They were being supplied from just the country north of them, Red China. We're giving them all the supplies and equipment to fight this Viet Minh, fight this communist insurgency that they were mounting against this French who had this colonial possession. And the French were fighting them from 1945 all the way up to 1954. And the French were losing because they had overstretched supply lines as compared to the Viet Minhs. They could never recruit and get enough men. In short, they didn't have enough of the 3 M's. Money, men, or materiel. And they could never match the Viet Minh in any of those. In men, in money from the Chinese that were supplying the Viet Minh, or from materiel in order to fight the war. So in a desperate bid to try to break the Viet Minh, they set up this base camp in this small little valley called Dien Bien Phu in the northwestern section of Indochina, in an attempt to lure the Vietnamese into a decisive battle that they thought that they could win, and they couldn't. They put 15,000 men, 10% of all their fighting forces, into this valley, and the only way that they could supply these forces was via one little tiny airstrip and 75 transport planes that they had. And then the Viet Minh, right there up on the border with their partner, Red China, threw 2 entire divisions at them, including a regiment of heavy artillery. And it was just an absolute disaster for the French. It wound up in the expulsion of the French from Indochina, the partitioning of Vietnam into North Vietnam and South Vietnam, the communist North and the Southern free, democratic, allegedly Southern Vietnam, which then sucked in the United States later and led to the US and their Vietnam War. So it's a historically significant battle. It's a very historically significant battle. It's one that a lot of people, a lot of young people you talk to today, and they're completely unaware of it. And I wanted to get into it and get into more of the detail of it. And this is the book that came up, which is Hell in a Very Small Place. It's written by Bernard Fall. And Bernard Fall As an author, he was born in Austria, but when Germany took over Austria, his family left and went to France, and so he grew up in France. And then when Germany invaded France in World War II, he wound up fighting in the French army. And then subsequently, he wound up going over to Indochina after the war and studying the French battles and what was going on with their politics in Indochina. And he also came over to the United States and got a degree in international politics and wound up being a professor at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And then while he was there, he petitioned the French government over and over to get access to the French National Archives, which had been secured. They were not open to the public in order to get all the records that the French government had on that fateful battle at Dien Bien Phu. And the French government finally relented. They gave him access to those records. And for 3 years, he had access to every piece of documentation that the French government had, all of the communiques and memos between the generals and the commanding officers, all the battle plans, all the logistical reports of the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. And he researched all of that to a depth beyond almost anything I would say beyond anything you can find in any other book. And it's contained here in this book, Hell in a Very Small Place, that was at one point mandatory reading at the U.S. Naval War College and at West Point. It's that good of a book. It is exceptionally well researched. There's an exceptional amount of detail in it. Unfortunately, Bernard Fall, he continued his interest in Vietnam after the French were expelled from it in 1954, after they withdrew. And in 1967, 1 year after his book here was published, he was on patrol with a group of United States Marines in Vietnam when they came into a village, and he was recording on his tape recorder what was going on as they went into the village. And they said it was deserted, and he said it felt bad, and he thought that they were going to be ambushed. And right as he was saying the word ambushed, he stepped on a landmine and he was killed in 1967, which is quite unfortunate. He was quite a guy. But fortunately, we do have his book here, Hell in a Very Small Place, which gives an exceptionally detailed account of the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, the Siege of Dien Bien Phu. And it's just a wonderful book, super well researched by Bernard Fall. I always want to call him Bernard Shaw, but by Bernard Fall. And it's written very well as well. I was worried that because of the level of research, the level of minutia that went into it, it goes all the way down to him telling you the amount of gallons that they put into the airplanes for the initial airdrop into Dien Bien Phu by the French. I mean, that's the level of minutia that he goes down into. And almost an hour-by-hour account of the 56-day siege of Dien Bien Phu and all the events leading up to it. But amazingly, it doesn't bog down in all that minutia. He manages to keep all of that information worked into a story that works as a story. Now, I will say this is not a casual read. Even by military historical standards, reading a military history, this is still not a casual read, but it is a very rewarding read. If you're looking for an excellent account, an excellent detailed account that spares none of the details of the grittiness and the brutality that the French were experiencing there at Dien Bien Phu, and the fighters in particular, and just the colossal hubris and ineptitude or inability to grasp what the situation was by the French high command and the strength of the forces that were opposing them. This is an excellent read that I highly recommend. One of the interesting things in there is that they always said that the French depended on the Germans, a la Casca the Legionnaire here, in order to fight for them in their battles. And he talks about the use of the Germans in the French Foreign Legion, but he says that there were other troops in there that were just as effective as the French Foreign Legion Germans. And that was the French regular forces, regular army. This is a late thing going on, the late night videos. The French regular army paratroopers, who were the elite of the French army, fought exceptionally well. And the French Moroccans fought exceptionally well, that they were very dependable, very brave troops. And between the Moroccans and the French paratroopers and the Germans, that those were the three units that could be depended upon to fight and fight hard and fight well. And the men who were here, the French soldiers on the ground, dealing with this complete ineptitude by the French high command, their complete inability to grasp what the true situation was, is really remarkable and a testament to their courage here. Very few of the 15,000 that went into there made it out of Dien Bien Phu and back to France during that war and that battle. So that's an excellent account. If you're interested in it, I highly recommend it. Bernard Fall, Hell in a Very Small Place. It is nearly 500 pages. It is a bit of an undertaking to do, but it's a rewarding one. So that's the first book, which brings us to book 2, which is Longitude by Dava Sobel, which is her recounting of how John Harrison, a English carpenter in the 1700s, solved the longitude problem. The longitude problem was a problem where ship captains and ship navigators had absolutely no way in the 1700s and before, in the age of sail, where they could tell where they were precisely when they were sailing across vast distances in the oceans. When they got out of sight of land, they could not navigate precisely. There was no way to tell where they were precisely upon these longitudinal lines of navigation when they were going across the oceans. And it was resulting in ship disaster after ship disaster after ship disaster, the loss of just immense amounts of riches out of the national treasuries of these ocean-going nations, and it was costing them thousands of lives, to the point where in the 1700s, England establishes the Longitude Prize, which just goes to the first person that can build a device or come up with a method in order to be able to properly and precisely navigate on the oceans. And it was 20,000 pounds, which back in the 1700s equated to millions and millions of dollars. And this is how John Harrison, a self-trained carpenter who had no training in making clocks, comes up with the most precise and accurate clock-making, navel-going, naval chronometer clocks in the world, with this ingenious inventions and devices that he comes up with in order to revolutionize clockmaking. And it's a wonderful book. It has John Harrison as the hero, and it has Neville Mescaline as the villain in it. And Neville Mescaline is an astronomer. He is the British Royal Astronomer, the Astronomer Royal. And he has his method, which is called the lunar distance method, whereas an astronomer, a very accomplished astronomer, the first astronomer to properly determine the mass of the exact mass of planet Earth, he comes up with a method to track longitude by tracking the movement of the moon and the stars across the heavens. And it works, but it's much cruder than the clock, and it only works at night, and it only works if the weather is good, and if all these other factors come into alignment. But Neville Mescaline is also appointed to the board of Longitude and becomes its commissioner on deciding who gets the prize. And guess whose method that he originally goes with, even though John Harrison, with these just fabulous clocks, his clock H4 is considered to be labeled, or I should say is praised as the greatest clock ever made, the most important clock ever made by man, and that is probably accurate. That is probably a true statement. He gives the prize to himself, and then there's a great debate ensues. And Neville, as the commissioner, Neville Mescaline, he then issues a warrant to seize all of John Harrison's clocks. He goes and gets his clocks. He deliberately drops one on the ground to try to break it, and then they load all 4 of them into a wooden cart with no suspension on it and run it over London's brick-paved roads to the astronomy lab, where he then tests them and calls them faulty. And at that point, then he then tasks John Harrison with creating 2 more clocks from scratch, while he has seized all of his diagrams and he has seized all of his clocks to work from. And John Harrison goes out and makes another one that works just as well. And of course is vindicated in history as being the person who comes up with these fabulous timepieces, these chronometers that are now enshrined in museums over in England and are big tourist attraction draws over there. And this is just a fascinating account, a very short, very quick novel, very quick book, I should say, to read on it. And it is just a wonderful book. Here's the Philadelphia Inquirer, the blurb on the front. As much a tale of intrigue as it is of science, a book full of gems for anyone interested in history, geography, astronomy, navigation, clockmaking, and not the least, plain old human ambition and greed. The Philadelphia Inquirer. And it's an excellent tale. It's a great historical tale, and it's a great tale from a human perspective as well. And I highly recommend it. And that is Longitude by Dava Sobel. And with that, I'm going to wrap this one up because I can barely stay awake. And I'm going to say, take care, be safe, and I'll catch you guys next time.